My friends, this is Dr. Mark Miravalle. On October 13th, 2013, history was made. Pope Francis consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Now, I say history was made because every time the Vicar of Christ on earth consecrates everyone to our Mother's Immaculate Heart, you have a tremendous release of grace. I mean, picture just a blanket of grace coming down from heaven upon each individual. And then it's always a question of how each individual responds to that grace. But every time the person who's the Vicar of Christ on earth, who has the keys of the kingdom, uses those keys to unlock the graces that come from the Immaculate Heart of Mary, it's an event of history. So we have to be appreciative for the beautiful act of consecration that Pope Francis did on October 13th. And of course, it's surrounded by beautiful Marian teachings on the vigil the night before. He does a beautiful teaching on Our Lady as the undoer of knots. And very pastorally, he says, it's like a child. If a child, says a lie, he creates a little knot in his heart. And then that knot has to be tended to. There's got to be a righting of the relationship between the parents and the child. There's got to be forgiveness and a restoration of trust. Well, every time we sin, we create a knot in our heart. And with many knots, you can get a great entanglement of the soul. And Our Lady is the one, based on the great teaching of St. Irenaeus, that by her obedience, she undoes the knot of Eve's disobedience, and she brings us the graces of Jesus, that this is something important for each one of us. Who dare say they don't have any knot? That'd be like saying an individual mentioning that they don't have any sin, because with every time we fail, there's some knot. So here's Pope Francis opening the love and the motherhood of Our Lady to the whole world, calling us all to see that each of us need her grace as the undoer of knots. And then the consecration. Now, the consecration happens on October 13th. The Holy Father does not mention Russia, and that disappointed some. Why did it disappoint some? Because some were under the impression that Pope John Paul II did not accurately and validly fulfill Our Lady's request from Fatima, where she requests that Russia would be consecrated to her Immaculate Heart. Well, therein lies the problem. That would be a misunderstanding, because Pope John Paul II consecrated the world, inclusive of Russia, to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. And Sister Lucia, the principal visionary, confirms in over 5 interviews that the consecration asked by Our Lady was satisfied by Pope John Paul II on March 25th of 1984. Sister Lucia gives a beautiful explanation. She says, it's like a priest consecrating unconsecrated hosts. Which hosts are consecrated? Well, the ones he intends. So even if you're talking about a big mass where you can't get all the unleavened bread on the altar, you have to have side altars and things like that. What gets consecrated? Whatever the celebrant intends. And Sister Lucia said, and the Pope John Paul II, intended Russia. So when the Pope says the Fatima request was fulfilled, and then Sister Lucia repeats it in over 5 interviews, who are we to say that it's not fulfilled? We'd have to be careful of either, a misunderstanding, miscommunication, or even presumption to say what the Pope's and the primary visionary from Fatima says is done is not done according to our mind. So Pope Francis did not include Russia because, first of all, he did include Russia in the sense of consecrating everyone, which includes Russia, to Our Lady of Fatima. Secondly, I think it was wise that he did not specify Russia as if to imply that what John Paul II did was somehow incomplete. My friends, gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. That's what we have to have for Pope Francis, for his Marian love, for what he did on October 13th. We'll all benefit from the consecration that was done to Our Lady of Fatima by Pope Francis on October 13th if we allow the graces to enter our hearts. Let's also renew our own personal consecrations. If you haven't done a consecration to Our Lady, now is the time to do it. Give a personal yes to what the Holy Father has done in consecrating you as part of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Let the Mother enter the heart. Let her do what she does best, and that is clean the tabernacles of our hearts to be completely dedicated to our Lord Jesus. And I encourage you also to continue praying to Pope Francis for the proclamation of the fifth dogma. I think he has yet more to do, because if you consider the whole world in a knot, in an entanglement of many knots, and I think that's an easy enough image in light of the world news, the world's a mess in many ways. We need supernatural help. Well, to untangle the world's knots, Our Lady has said in her own messages, in approved apparitions, that we need the proclamation, the solemn definition of her role as the spiritual mother of all humanity, under her three essential titles of co-redemptrix, mediatrix, and advocate. She has said repeatedly that only with the proclamation of the dogma of Mary as our spiritual mother will peace be obtained for the world. So I ask you to pray for Pope Francis and the proclamation of the fifth Marian dogma, also to write to Pope Francis. It was interesting, even last week, a lady in her 80s wrote to Pope Francis and mentioned that she got mugged on an Italian bus, and within a few weeks later, Pope Francis had sent €200 to the parish priest from where the lady came from. It's extraordinary how he is the Pope of listening to the people. Let him listen to you. Write to the Holy Father. It's a very simple thing. From the United States, it's 3 postage stamps. Put Pope Francis, Vatican City. And then write from your heart to his heart. And I'd ask you to consider writing in support that this is the time, that this is the right time for the Pope to declare Our Lady as our spiritual mother, for the fifth Marian dogma. If you write to Pope Francis thanking him for what he's done and saying, Holy Father, if you think it's the right time for the fifth Marian dogma, I'm behind you, he'll know exactly what it means. As Dr. Mark Miravalle is saying, let's thank God for the gift of Pope Francis, for the consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and for each of us doing our part to bring forth the dogma, the fifth Marian dogma, and the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary with its cherished fruit and flowering of world peace. God bless.